Welcome to another episode of the Wandering Watercolor. Let's paint. So the image that we're painting today is this next one in the horse book, or the Majestic Horses book. As always, any paint works. Have some porcelain dishes to mix your colors, any paintbrush, scrap piece of paper. It does not have to be watercolor paper. I'll have everything in the description as far as all the tools that I'm using and a wide range of tools that you can use if you want to. And this is the next image. I always have 2 jars of water on the side and a little paper towel or a rag that you can use as you go along. And yeah, let's get started. So the first thing we'll do is we'll grab some brown. I'm not going to use the technical names for any of the colors like phthalo blue, or this one that I'm using right now is English red ochre. I'm just going to call them as they are, so just brown, that's what I'm getting. And we're mixing up a good amount so that we're going to mix up the color for the horse here. And we're doing a flat wash, which is basically just to lay in the base color, and then we'll build on top of that. And so what we'll do is we're just going to go ahead and don't worry about all the little details. We'll get those afterwards. But first we're just layering in just like that. And it doesn't have to be perfectly even. We're just trying to block in the color. Now, when it comes to watercolor, usually you don't want to try to force it to do what you want it to. Sometimes it has kind of like a mind of its own and it'll go in a certain direction. And through years of experience, I've found that if you just let it do its own thing and don't try to overcorrect it, it tends to look better than if you try to make it do what you want it to. So if you go outside of the lines a little bit, totally fine. Not a big deal. Okay. So you see how we very quickly block that in. And we're just gonna let it dry. And you can tell it's not all completely even. The way that I distribute the colors or the color onto the object is not perfectly even. Now if you want to, you can try to do that. I just personally think usually it ends up being more interesting if it's not perfectly distributed. So now what I did is I rinsed my brush and I kind of removed on the edge of the cup that I have here. I removed most of the moisture. There is still some moisture in the brush. And what I'm doing next is using that. There's still moisture on the paper, but if I use that darker color, I can go ahead and lay in for the darker or more shadowy parts of the animal. And go like that. A little bit here. Okay. Underneath. So obviously the light is coming from the top. So we're aiming to have the darker parts of the animal more on the bottom side. Or the bottom part, I should say. And again, it does not have to be perfect. But if you want to create that interesting contrast, you want to have more pigment on your brush. And that's what we just did for the parts that we layered in. And now I'm going to take off, like I rinsed my brush, I'm going to take off a lot of the moisture with my rag here. And then going along the edges of where the color that we just put in, we're going to blend it in a little bit. And that looks good. I like how that looks. Now we just have to let it dry. And while that's drying, we can go ahead and grab some green any green works. You don't have to use the exact same palette as I am. Obviously, I'll leave you all the details of everything in the description. But trust me when I say that any palette works. There's no right palette. You don't even have to use the exact same colors that I do. But what I'm doing here is I've gathered a good concentrated amount of paint. So there's less water, more pigment. So that I can kind of just do these quick strokes following... I'm just following the drawing of the grass. And what I'm doing is I'm going from down to up and just doing quick brush strokes like that. And I'm not doing it evenly all throughout, just kind of sporadically, because that creates more of that kind of chaotic yet organized look that a lot of grass has, or a lot of nature, honestly. And once I have all that layered in, I'm going to rinse my brush a little bit. There's still a little bit of the color left in there, but I'm also, since there's more water, I can just kind of pull it out of the marks that I already laid in. We're just kind of doing all of that. And I'm kind of just rubbing in the brush back and forth like this. And it does not have to be perfect. I'm going to keep saying that over and over throughout the video. And if you've watched any of my other tutorials, you know that I always try to emphasize that it does not have to be perfect. And that's part of the appeal of watercolor, is that there's just a certain amount of chaos that you can't get rid of. And so now that we did that, I'm just going back in doing the exact same thing with the grass that we did a second ago, which is just those upward strokes. What that does is it does create some darker areas, so it gives more of a variety. Okay, so we're good there. I'll go ahead and rinse my brush. And for the next part, we want to color in the hair of the horse. Oh, you know, I just realized I missed the ears over here. We could just pick up some of that brown and just go right in. There we go. Simple enough. Now, for the mane and the tail of the horse, you have two options. If you have black, you can just use straight black. But oftentimes when you're painting organic things like animals or plants, nature in general, you want to avoid using just straight black, just because it makes it look very synthetic. Now, if you're painting something like machinery, that's totally fine. Like, if I was to make a painting of this brush, I would use just straight black, just because this is a synthetic color. But when you're painting nature, it's always best to try to mix the colors. So the way that I'll do that is, for the mane, I'm going to grab some of that same brown. We can just mix it right here. That same brown, and then you can have your pick from. You can get some teal, you can get some blue or purple. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get this blue. I have two different shades of blue. One of them is lighter, one of them is darker. And I'm going to get the darker shade of blue and then just mix it up. Now, if you look closely, that looks kind of like a blue-gray. And that's fine, because we can use that for the base color, and then we'll go back over it. And then so we're just going to fill that in. It's more really like a green-gray. But that's fine. And if you see my hand shaking a little bit, I think it's because I had way too much coffee this morning. Okay. Just fill that in. Like that. And then do the same for the tail. As always, you don't have to be right inside the lines. It doesn't have to be perfect. You can do some strokes here to give it some texture. be a little more loose with it. Rinse your brush. Now we'll go ahead and we'll focus on the saddle that the girl is sitting on. We'll do that by getting some purple. Now, if you don't have purple in your palette, it's very, very easy. Just get some blue and red and play around with the ratios. What I'm doing is I'm going to grab a little bit of blue, make that a little more on the blue side. And then also I'll throw in just a little bit of brown to kind of neutralize it. I don't want it to be too strong. So I think this color that I have right here is perfect. And what we'll do is we'll go ahead and we'll put in, I'm gonna mix all of this in like that. I'm gonna rinse off my brush. But what I'll do now is I rinse the brush and I'm going to take most of the moisture out of it and then pick up some of that color that I just laid in, because I want to lighten this part of the saddle. Whenever you're doing shadows, you always have two options. One is you can wait for it to dry and then put in another layer of paint, which will make it darker. Or while it's drying, if you just pick up some of the pigment off of there, it'll lighten up that area. Now that we have that, we can go ahead and paint the jeans. And the way that we do that, we're going to get the lighter blue. Get a good amount of it. I might need a little more water. Makes the color easier to pick up. Okay. And then we'll go ahead and we'll grab a little bit of brown. Brown and blue kind of neutralize each other and can give you a more organic looking gray. And depending on how much of each color you put in, you can play around and kind of push to either direction, make it a little warmer or cooler. And jeans obviously have kind of like this faded bluish grayish tone to them. And if you're mixing that color, using blue and brown is the easiest way to get that specific tone. Now what we'll do is we'll lay that in kind of like in the direction that she's facing, but we're not going to fill in the whole part of the jeans. What we're going to do is we'll do half of them, kind of just fill in half. Rinse your brush completely rinse the brush. Dry it off, but make sure there's still some moisture in there. And then what we're doing is taking the edge and then pulling it towards the other half that we did not paint. Now what that does is it creates some of that faded look that jeans have. And that's perfect. I'm very happy with that. The next part, we need to paint the boot here on this side. And the way we'll do that is we have this kind of like the color that we used for the mane, but what we'll do is we'll actually add a little more brown to it. The boots that she's wearing, they're leather boots, and if we use brown, we don't want it to be the exact same color as the horse, but we just want it to be distinguishable. And we're just going to go ahead and lay that right in. And it's okay if you paint over the little step thingy that she's stepping on. I don't know the technical term for it. Just paint right over it, because later we're going to use a darker color to outline it, so we'll still be able to see it. We'll let that dry, and while that's drying, we can focus in on the softer part of the saddle that's cushioning her where she's sitting. The way we'll do that is we'll actually grab some orange, and if you don't have orange, it's very simple to mix. Just get some red and yellow. I often like to use shortcuts when I'm painting, and I usually, because I tend to paint a lot, I try to always find the quickest way to get to the result that I'm looking for. I find that this palette is perfect for me because it has the exact number of colors where I'm not overthinking it, but also it gives me some shortcuts. Like, you'll see that I have a skin tone that I have here, because mixing skin tones can take some time, and often if I'm sketching, I try to do it quickly. But anyway, so okay, we have the orange here, and we are going to put in a little bit of brown, kind of mute it a little bit. We don't want it to be too strong. And then go ahead and color that in. Rinse our brush. For the girl here, I will show you how to mix the skin tone, because I assume that you more than likely don't have a skin tone on your palette. And actually, this skin tone took me a very long time to find. I will at some point just make a video dedicated to skin tones and watercolor. I'm just going to step back for a moment. It's always good to step back from the painting every now and then. Okay. So the next thing, just looking at it, while this is drying, I don't want to add more over here, worrying that if it's not dry enough, it'll bleed in. So we can actually just focus back onto the mane. And we'll do that by grabbing some brown, grabbing some dark blue, and you'll notice I'm using less water, more pigment, just because that really helps bump up the contrast. And I might actually use a little bit of purple. If you don't have purple, just throw in a little bit of red in there to kind of really try to neutralize things. Okay. And then what we'll do is we're going to use the tip of the brush just so that we have a thinner line, and just kind of do some quick strokes just to show the texture of the hair, or the mane I should say, and do it more towards the bottom half. That way we can show that it's darker because there's the sun shining on top of it. It creates that that illusion of shadow much better, like that. And then we do the same for the tail, like that. Just try to use the tip of the brush. It just makes it much easier to create those nice thin lines. Or if you prefer, you can just grab a finer tip brush. I have several here on the side, but I know a lot of artists like myself prefer to just use one brush the entire time that they're painting, just because it's like it's almost like you get in the flow and you don't want to interrupt that. I don't want to stop and think about different brushes. But if you feel more comfortable, just use a different size brush. And then we can go back in and add some more color to the shading of the underneath of the horse. The way we'll do that is we'll grab this, the brown, we can just mix it in with the green that we have here. And we can add a good amount of brown. And then add a little bit of purple. There we go, a little more brown. I might actually do a little bit of red. Let's see. I'm gonna need a little more brown. And it's okay to take your time when you're mixing the colors. The thing with watercolor, even though it's very fun to use and paint, obviously you can't undo. You can kind of pick up color and remove it when it's still wet, but once it's dry, it's on there. You're essentially staining the paper, which once it's on there, you can't undo it. So I like how concentrated this color is, and we can go in and add more definition to the shadows. So I'm just gonna go in and kind of do underneath like that, maybe some of the little definitions in the musculature of the horse, kind of outline those. Not everywhere, but just a little bit here and there, just to give that higher contrast, to really show that they are outside during the daytime. You know, when you're outside during day, it's there's some very stark contrasts whenever the sun is shining on any object. This leg back here, I'm actually going to make most of it in shadow, like that, and then a little bit here, kind of like to show the definition of the muscle. A little bit here, not a lot, kind of like that. Maybe down here a little bit, since this leg, this part of it is further down in the grass, maybe a little darker. Same for this. I always have to kind of like stop and think. I don't want to overwork an area, but I think this right here looks just fine. Now, while the marks that we just made are still wet, you can always just grab a moist brush and then just kind of mute some of them, or you can make the edges a little fuzzier if you want to. If you like how it looks, then just don't bother it. Okay, now the color that we had mixed for the mane earlier, for the darker part, what we're going to do is we're just going to grab a little bit of it. We're going to put it up here and add water to it, because that's going to be the shading for the white shirt that she's wearing. And we don't want it to be too dark. We want to have it diluted, so that if we want to make it darker, that's easier to do. And we're just going to go right in here slowly, and then just kind of put in the color where the shading would fall. And just leave it. You don't want to do too much, because once we add the background color and the rest of the color in her, it will pop a little more. So it looks a little muted right now, but whenever we put in the colors surrounding her, it will look, it'll make it pop. It'll make it stand out more. Right now it just looks muted because it's surrounded by white. But we'll take care of that. And the next thing that we'll do while this is drying, we don't want to go ahead, we don't want to just go in and start painting the rest of it around this area, because we want to make sure that this is dry before we do that. We don't want it to bleed in. So what we'll do now is we can actually focus on making the outline for the different straps on the harness here. And the way we do that is, if you have black, just go ahead and directly grab that black color from your palette. If you don't, you can just use the darker color that we used for the mane. You may want to add more dark blue, or just a mixture of colors to make it darker. And what we'll do is, let's see, I'm just going to test the color. We want to, again, just use the tip of the brush so you can make those nice thin lines If you press down too much or use more of the brush, you get really thick lines. So I'm just going to grab just straight black and then just go ahead and do that. Now if you're asking yourself, why am I using just directly the black from the palette without adding any color into it? It's because the straps are more synthetic, which actually also creates more differentiation between the horse and the straps that they're using. And just go ahead and very slowly add in that black color, and just take your time. Okay, like that. There's several straps dangling here. And then we'll go ahead and we'll do that in here. Okay, perfect. Rinse my brush. Okay. And then this part looks like it's pretty dry. So what we can go ahead and focus on next is mixing the skin tone. So the thing with mixing skin tones is that it's very delicate. Less is more in this situation. So for example, if I grab some red, obviously that's way too much. I'm going to grab a little bit of orange. It kind of gives you like a peachy sort of color. And I'm going to dilute it greatly. Like I'm diluting that color a lot. I'm just adding a lot of water. And it's a little too orange. So I'm just going to add a little bit of red. Added in there. And so I would say that that's a pretty good skin tone. You can always test it on a spare sheet of paper, and I would say that looks just about right. And the first thing we'll do is we're just going to add it in. Flat wash, meaning that we're just blocking in the area. We're not worried about doing any shading or texture. So just fill in that color just like that. If there's too much water on your brush, you can always just dry it off with your paper towel. Now, if you look at this right now, it looks kind of dark in some places. This is one of the deceptive parts of watercolor painting. That's just because there's more water there. That doesn't mean that it's actually that dark. Because what will happen is, as it dries, it'll lighten up a lot. While that's happening, while that there is drying, I did want to show you. So the skin color that I just have ready to go, that's right here. That's just straight from the tube. And obviously, I'll add a link to all of that in the description. But you can see it's very similar to the color that we mixed up. It's just that this takes more steps, and this just makes it much quicker for sketching, getting ideas down. Or if you're out and about and you're just sketching people, that's super useful. I don't do that as often anymore, but it's super fun to just try to capture how somebody looks. Okay, now while this is drying, we can go ahead and focus back in here. So what we'll do there is switch out my mixing plates. I'm going to get some purple and kind of mix it in between the brown and the grayish color that we had over here. And I'm doing that as a shadow color, basically. So I'm just going to go ahead and add that into the shadow part over here, like that. A little bit underneath where she's sitting, kind of outlining parts of the saddle. And then maybe this line here, a little bit close to the leg, like that. Okay. And now, while it's still wet, I'm going to rinse off my brush completely, take off a lot of the moisture, and then just pull that off. Pull that away from what we just laid down. And the reason is it kind of like diffuses it and makes it look a lot more like a shadow. And you can see how much lighter the color is for the skin. It's not completely dry yet, but you can see how much lighter it's gotten. Now there is going to be a little bit of variation, and that's fine. In terms of the parts that are lighter and parts that are darker, totally fine. If you look at really any skin tone, there's always a lot of variation in light and dark. Just because of the human anatomy, there's so many complex little shapes, and the light is always kind of like, how should I say it? Because you're always moving. It's that's part of the thing that I like about watercolor. Once you paint more people, it creates it makes it look almost alive. Anyway, that's a whole nother discussion for whenever we paint people. Okay, anyway, so the next part that we'll do is we can start focusing on some of the background color. And what I would do is just grab some blue. It doesn't matter if it's dark or light blue, because we're going to dilute it anyway. And just mix up the color. And then what we'll do is put it right against her and then just pull it out. Right against and just pull it out like that. Just take your time and be careful. Okay, and then we'll rinse the brush mostly and then just kind of pull that out. It can be a little chaotic, it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm gonna dry off my brush, pick up some of that extra paint, and then just do that. And do the same thing on the other side. Grab some paint and put that in right there. And you'll just close, but be careful. And around the hat here, like that. Just take your time and just pull that out a little bit. And rinse the brush, dry it off a little, and then just pull the rest of it out. I like pushing down on the paper as I pull it out because it creates that nice texture, picking up some of the texture of the paper and kind of like creating the brush strokes. And we can do the same for the rest around the horse. So down here, put a little bit like that. Around here. You can tell this part I'm not too worried about the details. You just kind of pull that out. There we go. Okay, rinse the brush. So I'd say we're maybe like 85% done. Just some details that we have to put in here, as well as the hair color, obviously the hair and the hat. So for the hair, what we'll do is we'll grab just some straight yellow. You can use brown, black, whatever color you really want to. And the reason I'm putting yellow is because there's not a lot of, there's some orange, and some of the lighter parts of the horse are kind of like lighter warm colors, but adding that in there will add more variety of color into the painting. Okay, so just add that in there. And that's all I'm going to put in here. I don't want to, I'm not going to add any shadows to that just because it's such a small detail area. And rinse my brush. And while that's drying, we don't want to paint in the hat just yet, just because we don't want it to bleed into the hair color. But what we can do is now we can go ahead and this color right here for the mane that we had mixed up previously, we're going to add a third layer for detail. And we can actually, so we're mixing in the dark blue, the brown, we can throw in a little bit of purple, and we're using a lot more pigment, a lot less water. The reason is we do want to create a very dark color for outlines. So like for example, I'll go ahead and do the same thing with the hair for the horse here, just a little bit kind of like that. You can tell this is a little bit more on the blue side. What that does is creates better contrast, because the body of the horse is obviously much more on the warm side, and if we add a little more blue on the outlines here, it creates a better contrast. And also we can do the same with the line that runs along the side of the jeans, like that. Maybe outline a little bit. And take your time. Like that. Maybe do a little bit more into the jeans. Okay. A little bit here. A little bit here. And rinse the brush. And then, now that this color is dry, we can just go ahead and grab some of this brown. And then just fill in the color of the hat. Okay. Just carefully. Okay, so I think we're almost done. I'm just going to step back for a moment. So I'd say we're pretty much done. If you want to, you can always go in and add some outlines. You don't have to, that's always an option. The outlines can be done in several different ways. One of them is to use a pen, just a regular pen. So for example, like I could go in with this pen that I have right here, and I could just add, you know, I can add actual outlines like this. It doesn't have to be everywhere, just in certain places that I want to stand out more. If I want to separate some objects, you know, like from from one another. Or if you want a more subtle outline, you can always just grab a pencil and then just outline wherever you want. Like for example here, the wristwatch that she has on, we don't want it to stand out too much, but we do want to show it. You can add some outlines in the hat, the mane, wherever you want. You get the idea. But basically, that's it for this one. Okay, if you have any questions, just shoot me a message, leave a comment, whatever works, and I usually respond within 24 hours. And with that, I'll see you on the next episode.